There existed an addiction to blood. Who is really this rude? It's spooky season and the new Clipping album was released Friday, and I'm pretty pleased with it. I'm not going to go through the random mumbo jumbo that it takes to get people familiarized with Clipping. If you're here at this point, I would assume that you've already heard the previous work and been a fan and noted for yourself what you feel their strengths and downsides are. But this album strikes me in a different way because October is my month. I was born on the 25th. It's spooky season, meaning Halloween's coming up really soon. And this album speaks about addictions, habits, insanity, and loss of life through the lens of a horror film. And it isn't typical cheap horror film relying on jump scares to get you out of your seat, instead relying on the resourcefulness by sampling objects like moving cars, playing music on tracks like Run For Your Life. And I think that's something this album does really well, is that it unsettles you. It does a better job than most horrorcore of not being so typically gimmick driven, placing a higher emphasis on mixing up your senses, forcing you to prioritize processing the likely danger associated with these sounds. As humans, it's been proven that we are wired to react faster to sound than we are visual information, so the paranoia this album stirs up within listeners can at points feel irrational without a visual manifestation of danger. I think David does well enough to paint the visual lyrically to make it seem threatening with a persistent delivery. Add to it the sound of random noise bits flashing through an ambient abyss. If you really were running from something, your body would likely lock up from the shock, preventing you from escaping whatever impending doom that you're running from. It emphasizes an instinctive will for survival, so while on the one hand much of the lyrical content on this album works to desensitize us to thoughts of mortality, it prevents itself from being used as a comfort tool due to its at time cold, ear-piercing nature, threatening your senses, forcing an urge within you to flee from a threat you've yet to distinguish. The eerie spoken word counseling from Ed Balloon warning of a presence akin to what you'd hear from the crazy man of a village terrorized by some monster, weird presence, or huge demon leads very carefully into Diggs giving a soldier return from war-like performance as he likens police to hunters after you for the color of your skin, your youth, your life. His verse appears traumatic, acknowledging we've lost this fight and the best way to have the edge is to run, preserve, and regroup. I love his "they masters of trapping and you just a trapper who went for a masters and dropped out when it didn't matter no more" line. The theme is a cold, numbing, and desensitized approach to issues plaguing mankind, from gang culture, classism, and most forms of oppression, mutating into an inhumane theater-like satire hovering over chilling near horrorcore production. Examples of such occur on the track The Show, a relentless showcasing of mutilation, deliberately detailed, and torture, evoking a remorseless and immoral circus act-like performance. From the assertions he makes during his "it's an art you partake in and just know you all paid to watch" lines, I get this track being more about classism, the worthlessness and lack of value given to the average human life, that despite trying to humanize at some point during this track, doesn't end up saving from a gory demise. The track All In Your Head finds religion at the focal point of scrutiny as we get a flamboyant performance from Robyn Hood, equating the pimping of a woman to worship, falling into a commanding Diggs mantra reminiscent verse. I find it interesting that the previous interlude is hazy and somewhat void, called Possession, where nothing noteworthy happens, maybe hinting at the wiping of one's own mind, making room for this new belief system. This song gives me the feeling that I'm at the bottom of a crypt, in a cage, under a single noisy light that flickers every so often, being force-fed a way of life, but simultaneously being misled by Counterfeit Madison's comforting, beautiful, gospel-like vocals, made with the intent to feel righteous and just, only with the understanding that from a third-person perspective, I'm being manipulated. How could this be a bad thing? I feel there's something to be said during the darker moments on this album, the dark ambience on the album, and how appropriately the at times dehumanizing and objectification of life sit atop it as subject matter. More simply, how terrifying it is that there are truths within the album clinging to us as we go through our day-to-day, just without this alarming or at times sinister-like production to signal to us if or when it's near and happening, which is why I feel the obnoxiously long piano burning track exists. Though I will never return to this track for any sort of replay value or personal enjoyment, in the context of the album, I can understand the closure this track brings to an album that spent majority of its time making the listener anxious while alive, only to finally display a calm once they die. If I understand the importance of an instrument like the piano and the potential that it has in music, I also understand the importance of life and the potential every person has to live it. And I feel the piano represents that life. As pretentious as it sounds, I just can't see it being feasible for a 16 to 18 minute track of a piano burning to make sense in the context of an album like this, unless it was trying to illustrate some other point. This piano represents life in the way that we have the potential to achieve dreams, goals, love, higher understanding, etc. But it doesn't change the fact that by the end of this album, we're watching that potential, that future, that ability, those cravings, those dreams. We're watching all that burn. It's one of the reasons that I like Blood of the Fang, where he embraces our potential, history, and future on the basis of a growing annoyance with talking accompanied by no action. David doesn't usually talk in first person, which, while jarring in that it can somewhat disconnect him from the audience, gives him the position of narrator, a position that oftentimes makes me feel like I'm watching the audio version of a Twilight episode. This is especially noticeable on tracks like Club Down, as Diggs narrates the area surrounding a club undergoing a shooting with these screeches and screams sampled underneath, further painting this pandemonium. This track is a bitter, flavorless, melody-free take on modern-day gangster rap and the effects banging, pill popping, addiction, violence can have on a community, but without the accompanying of the flashy lifestyle you'd get from Amigos' track, or an alternate perspective verse one would get if they were sat down and asked the effects that a Pusha T had on their community before he exited the drug scene and entered the rap game. If this is what gangster rap really was, or an accurate portrayal of such, then it wouldn't sell nearly as well as it has been recently, because the realities of this song and the effects of gangsta life on a community prevent it from being appealing, catchy, hard, or used as a tool to be sold for people's entertainment. It's bitter, it's tart, it's not funny, it's not nice. And don't get me wrong, I like gangster rap sometimes too, but I see less value in it when we lose sight of the trauma and repercussions associated with it, and this track illustrates that point beautifully to me. He similarly tackles the subject on La Mano Ordina with a surprisingly well-placed Benny the Butcher feature over a more traditionally swelling, eerie, warped background instrumental. He really wants the damage done and the effects of this lifestyle detailed and understood, as he's having his life ended by his two guest features and hearing their reasoning behind why. If I could describe it, David's rap style is that of a man who's been captured by the feds and threatened with a 1,000-year sentence. His response is relentless, calculated, rapid flow that goes supersonic at some points, giving so much information in a nihilistic view that even a tape recorder in the room might have trouble following. He uses this exact method on the intro track, which has this really tight ambience with footsteps inching closer and closer while you're distracted by his voice. I feel like I'm in front of a fire being forced to look only ahead, being tortured by my own anxiety due to these sounds flaring up my claustrophobia, closing the space in tighter and tighter on me. As I'm continuing to listen through the album and get more out of it, I feel like there's just this acknowledgement of me running away from the realities of life while trying to remain comforted by them. And I guess to some degree that kind of inspires some of the subject matter on the track before the finale, Attunement, which is this take that gets you to remain in torture, seeing just how far life can take you before you reach the edge. In a lot of ways, this album works as a satire to the way that we've been living, the way we've been digesting tragedy, and forces this massive pill down our throats with no water or no liquid to wash it down. And like I said, if I did have to describe this album as if it were a horror film, it'd be one of the more intricate horror films that increase levels of anxiety and make you feel off and disturbed, as opposed to outright scaring, being edgy and demented just for the sake of making you feel frightened that it does not. It plays in conceptual waters with this really eerie, non-linear backdrop. Despite me having a lot to say about me loving a good portion of the tracks on this project, and it being so rhythmic in certain aspects, I do have a few issues with the project. For one, the interludes not really manifesting into anything beyond what could just be a directional guide through the remainder of the project. But for the most part, they're really empty, don't have much in the way of replay value, and aren't very pleasing when it comes to the subjects that they tackle. I've always been kind of weary of interludes being scattered throughout albums, because I feel like if you aren't illustrating your points well enough, they act as these training wheels to help you illustrate your point more. Interludes are cuts that are still a part of an album, and I do still think that they should be somewhat musically pleasing enough for me to return to them. One of my bigger issues with clipping as a group remains their use of instrumentals and sounds that appear to be stock sounds with little to no alteration, lying in bed with very creative and sometimes life mirroring samples on the same album. It's like getting a perfect sear on a cod just to add a TV dinner to it. And though I do love David's poetic performances, his lack of self-inclusion and bird's eye point of view at many points during these tracks disassociate him from the overall point sometimes for me. These commentaries and narratives given in third person prevent David from ever being the centerpiece, which is disappointing given that he's the only vocalist of the group. Though I don't think at any point in this album he's trying to insinuate that he's better than the groups that he's dissecting or talking about, it doesn't leave much in the way for us to view introspection. Still though, if I had to describe this album as anything, it would be one of the perfect, disturbing yet thought-provoking albums I've listened to all year, and it's easily one of the best hip-hop horror stories I've ever listened to. Clipping with There Existed an Addiction to Blood. You let me know how you felt about the album in the comment section down below. I'm interested to hear what you have to say, and I will see you next time. I'm out. Peace.